They ruled with gold, but wiped with anything but luxury, from seashells to snowballs. Yes, snowballs. Ancient royals used some truly unbelievable things instead of toilet paper. And what they left behind wasn't just waste. It was a history of hygiene you were never taught. If strange, shocking secrets from the royal past fascinate you, hit that subscribe button and prepare to rethink everything you know about the throne. Imagine being one of the most powerful emperors of Rome and wiping with a sponge soaked in vinegar. That's exactly what Roman elites did. They used a tersorium, a sea sponge tied to a stick, shared by everyone in public latrines. After each use, it was dipped in salty water or vinegar and then placed back in a bucket for the next person. Even emperors, in their marble palace bathrooms, copied this practice. It was less about comfort and more about ritual. But one thing's for sure, the sponge on a stick was a far cry from royal luxury. In ancient Egypt, the pharaohs were buried in gold. But in life, they wiped with linen, the same soft fabric used for wrapping mummies. It sounds luxurious until you realize it wasn't fresh every time. The servants often washed and reused strips or left them drying under the scorching sun. Sometimes, even polished stones were used, cool, smooth, but painfully hard. And while nobles had access to perfumed cloths, peasants used sand or broken pottery shards. Yes, broken shards, called ostraca, scraped more than just dirt. There was a strange blend of status, suffering, and survival, where wiping was a symbol of how clean or how cursed your bloodline was. Long before Europe had toilet paper, ancient China had already made it royal. By the 6th century, wealthy Chinese nobles used sheets of soft rice paper, delicate, perfumed, and made just for personal use. And during the Tang dynasty, records show that emperors demanded over 2,000 sheets, each measuring 2 feet wide. This wasn't the rough parchment used in medieval Europe. This was toilet luxury, centuries ahead of its time. But even here, class mattered. While emperors had silk-soft paper, peasants in rural China wiped with bamboo husks or corn cobs. It was a kingdom divided by comfort, where even your toilet habits revealed your rank. When it came to appearances, no one outdid French aristocrats, but behind their powdered wigs and silken robes was a dirty little secret. Instead of paper, some nobles, especially during the lavish reign of Louis XIV, used discarded lace scraps or cloth napkins. These were often cut from worn-out undergarments or banquet table linens. Guess what? Servants were sometimes ordered to wash and return them. Even more bizarre, some royals would carry scented handkerchiefs, not for blowing noses, but for covering the smell from their own unclean bodies. Because in Versailles, bathing was rare, and wiping was more about masking than cleaning. In ancient Japan, royalty had a tool called the chugi, a thin, smooth wooden stick used to scrape, not wipe. These spatula-like instruments were carved from fragrant woods and sometimes polished with oil to avoid splinters. They were slid between the cheeks, gently pulled, and cleaned with care. It was a method built on ritual purity, where the body was treated like a temple. But let's be honest, even the most polished stick didn't offer comfort. And yet, to Japanese nobles, the chugi was a sign of dignity, a far cry from the rough hay or leaves their servants had to use in a society built on order and refinement. Even cleaning up after oneself had rules, grace, and splinters. They sailed the seas with blood-stained swords. But when it came to wiping, Vikings turned to the forest. The moss that's soft, absorbent, and everywhere in the northern lands. This was the preferred choice of Norse nobles and warriors alike. They gathered it in bundles, stored it in huts, and sometimes even used snowballs for a refreshing finish, especially during long winter campaigns. But moss wasn't just practical. It was spiritual. Some believed it purified the body and soul, especially before battle. While their enemies feared Viking blades, it's the idea of wiping with icy snow that might chill you the most. In the grandeur of Roman public baths, one question lingered. How did hundreds of people relieve themselves? Enter the tersorium, a communal sponge attached to a stick, soaked in vinegar or salt water between uses. Yes, communal. Shared by senators, merchants, even slaves, sometimes dozens a day. Stored in jars, dipped in brine, and reused again. For elite Romans, private homes offered soft, wool, or even imported cloths. But for the masses, one stick, one sponge. Many users, no wonder Roman toilets were long stone benches with holes side by side, no dividers, and lots of conversation, because in Rome, even wiping was a public affair. When the Roman Empire collapsed, so did toilet innovation. In medieval Europe, things got rough. Literally, most people, rich or poor, used whatever they could find: hay, straw, wool scraps, even handfuls of grass or leaves. Stones were common too, as long as they were smoothed up. But nobles? Some kept specially trained geese in palace gardens. Yes, geese cleaned, oiled, and gently used for wiping duties, especially among eccentric lords who believed in natural hygiene. And in castles, you might find straw-lined privies built over moats, where waste dropped straight into the water below. It wasn't elegant. But in the Dark Ages, survival meant creativity, even in the bathroom. While Europe struggled with straw and stones, the Islamic world embraced something far more advanced: water. In cities like Baghdad and Cordoba, indoor plumbing and tiled bathhouses were common. Elite homes featured lotus-style vessels, elegantly crafted pots designed for cleansing. For them, water symbolized both cleanliness and spiritual purity. Even royal palaces had dedicated washrooms with running water channels, a luxury that wouldn't appear in most European courts for centuries. And unlike communal sponges or cloths, this was personal, hygienic, and surprisingly modern. In a time when Europe used moss, Islamic scholars were writing books on hygiene, medicine, and sanitation, because for many ancient royals, true power wasn't just about wealth. It was about knowing how to stay clean when no one else did. Long before the world used paper for books, the Chinese were using it to wipe. By the 6th century, imperial records mention soft sheets reserved specifically for the emperor's toilet needs. These weren't scrolls or bamboo slats. They were thick, perfumed sheets, cut to size, and guarded like treasure. By the 14th century, during the Ming Dynasty, it's said over 700,000 sheets were produced annually just for the royal court. Some were even scented with herbs to mask odors, because wiping like a commoner was unthinkable for the Son of Heaven. And while the West wouldn't adopt toilet paper for another 1,000 years, China's elite had already embraced it. Soft, silent, and centuries ahead of its time. In the grand courts of Versailles, nothing was too extravagant. Not even for the bathroom. French aristocrats in the 17th and 18th centuries had access to lace, silk scraps, and scented cloth, all used as elegant alternatives to wiping tools. Yes, silked. Servants would sometimes warm the cloths before presenting them in golden basins. And in royal chambers, some nobles kept perfumed handkerchiefs, used once, then discarded. But while the elite wiped in luxury, the peasants below used cabbage leaves, wood shavings, or even their bare hands with cold water from a stream. The divide between royalty and the poor wasn't just seen in palaces. It was felt in the most private of moments. In ancient Japan, toilet culture was refined and specific. Instead of cloth or leaves, they used chugi, smooth, flat wooden spatulas, carefully carved and washed after each use. These were stored in lacquered boxes and often came in pairs, one for front, one for back, made of cedar or cypress. The wood carried a natural scent and was sometimes scented with oils. Temples and noble homes had designated cleaning tools, and it wasn't uncommon for a samurai or nobleman to carry his own personal set. But cleanliness was linked to purity, and the act of wiping, far from crude, was approached with ritual and dignity. Where other civilizations made do with scraps, Japan transformed the moment into something quiet, careful, and even beautiful. The Norse weren't known for their luxury, but they had their own rugged version of hygiene. Vikings used soft moss, sheep's wool, and even handfuls of snow when nature called. Moss was dried and stored inside wooden huts, while snow was considered not just cleansing, but refreshing in harsh winters. In coastal regions, some used sand mixed with seawater to scrub themselves clean, a method both abrasive and effective. Toilets were simple wooden boxes over pits, and while not glamorous, they were kept shockingly tidy compared to other medieval societies. The Norse believed in personal strength, and a clean body was part of that image. Even in freezing winds and icy forests, they refused to let filth define their legacy. Perhaps the most bizarre royal custom? Some monarchs didn't wipe at all, because someone else did it for them. In Tudor England, the position of groom of the stool was a real job chosen from noble families. This servant was tasked with assisting the king during toilet time. He handed the cloth, and sometimes wiped too. Far from shameful, the role came with immense trust, access to private conversations, royal secrets, and influence over court politics. Kings like Henry VIII were known to reward their grooms with land and titles. Because in the world of absolute monarchy, being closest to the throne didn't always mean standing beside it. Sometimes it meant kneeling behind it. And in those awkward silences, history was shaped. As centuries passed, one truth remained. Even the most powerful rulers faced the same daily need, from Roman strigils to Chinese perfumed paper, from Viking moss to French silk. Toilet hygiene reflected far more than comfort. It revealed status, beliefs, and even politics. What a monarch used behind closed doors was never truly private. It shaped how they were remembered: clean, refined, or careless. Today, modern comforts have replaced ancient tools, but one thought lingers. Behind every golden throne was a very human moment, a moment that proves, no matter how high you rise, nature always humbles you.